Okay, thank you and hello to everybody. I owe a small apology to the organizers because I sent my abstract too late. So it's not in a book of abstracts, but never mind. We are short with time, so I will just present you a few ideas about something that we discussed somehow today in a wider sense, but nobody actually talked about the subject of this particular exhibition. And that subject is Yugoslav socialistic realism. And I'm here interested as some kind of art historian for the status of Yugoslav socialist realism in the history of art of, I don't know, ex-Yugoslav of Yugoslav nations. How to read and how to interpret that big phenomena of socialist realist art in ex-Yugoslavia. And as you probably all know, history of socialistic realism in Yugoslavia is quite short. It started immediately after the Second World War in 1945, and already around 1950 we can say that that episode of Yugoslav socialist realist art is already over. It was transformed in some kind of modernistic art, which became some kind of dominant artistic language in that time in Yugoslavia. So, these are just a few facts. And we have that very important event in the history of Yugoslavia in the 40s. That was that famous Fifth Congress of Communist Party in Yugoslavia that was held in 1948. And it's an interesting event because on that Congress, Yugoslavia made a break with Stalin. That famous Tito's no to Stalin model of socialism. But paradoxically, on that same Congress was officially inaugurated socialist realism. So historians usually take that famous speech by Milovan Djilas, who held that speech on that Congress, as some kind of initiation of socialist realism in Yugoslav context. So the question is how to read and how to interpret that phenomena of socialist realism. Especially in Serbian art history, one attitude is dominant. And that attitude is that socialist realism is some kind of very conservative, dogmatic, and pro-Stalinistic artistic formation. It was something that was imported from the East, from the Stalin model, and it was inauguration of totalitarian political model within artistic production in Yugoslavia. So the main line of interpretation of socialist realism in Yugoslavia is that it is anti-modernistic artistic formation. But is it really like that? Socialist realism in Yugoslav context didn't just emerge from nowhere. It was not just a reception of Stalinist model. My thesis, and not only mine, if you read, literature, art historian literature in that field, you can see that there is a genesis of socialist realism in Yugoslav culture that was not emerged only in 1945. You have a very strong left-oriented tradition toward realistic art already in Kingdom of Yugoslavia during the 30s. And there were big polemics on the left during the 30s that was centered about the phenomena of and the status of realistic art within left movement. So there is an autonomous history of socialist realism in Yugoslavia within communist leftist movement in Yugoslavia. And that movement was closely linked to the ideas of modernism. There is also a very strong anti-Stalinist input within that movement that was very strong and influential in Yugoslav communist movement. So I will remember you on that famous clash or conflict on the left that started in Yugoslav context in the beginning of the 30s. And when you see polemics, when you read polemics of within that movement, you will see that those polemics are very similar to the polemics that was held in French context. You know, for that famous clash between Breton on the one side and Aragon on the other. Breton was for strictly surrealist art, and Aragon was for some kind of realistic model of socially engaged art. Very similar debates you can find in Yugoslav cultural space. And also, I think that anti-Stalinist sentiment was also very strong in Yugoslav movement. And the figure of Miroslav Krleža and Marko Ristić is crucial here. They articulated anti-Stalinist attitude within Yugoslav left and communist movement that was quite unique. And Miroslav Krleža in that time discovered, for example, that famous book by Andrej Žid, The Return from USSR. And that book was one of the first critics on the West of Stalinist totalitarianism. And also Krleža was very close to the ideas of the Romanian writer Panaiti Istraiti, who was also in Soviet Union and was disappointed with the ideas of Stalinist model. So I would say that the ideas of modernism and ideas of anti-Stalinism were already inscribed in Yugoslav left movement, and that they prepared the terrain during the 30s that will culminate in 1948, and they made the possible that famous no to this Stalinist totalitarian model. So anti-Stalinist attitude and pro-modernistic attitude was already inscribed in Yugoslav intellectual scene that shaped the form of Yugoslav modernist project. So they prepared the terrain in the second half of the 40s. And also that period during the 40s is quite contradictory. It's not homogeneous period. And that short period of time between 1945 and 1948 or 1950 is also full of inner contradictions. It was not homogenistic, completely totalitarian model, but some debates that were active during 30s manifested already again in the 40s. And I will tell you for a couple of historical facts. You know, usually people imagine that Miroslav Krleža, as one of the most important prominence of Yugoslav modernism, was marginalized during 40s, but that's not quite true. The last meeting between Miroslav Krleža and Josip Broz emerged just shortly before Second World War. They met in 1940. And Krleža got an invitation to join the partisan movement, and he refused. He had his reasons because of those misunderstandings between him and Communist Party during 30s. But immediately after the liberation, in 1945, happened the first meeting between Miroslav Krleža and Josip Broz. And Miroslav Krleža from Broz and Communist Party got an invitation to take an active part in rebuilding and reshaping of the new country. And he accepted. And already in 1945, he published one small text called Književnost danas, Literature Today, in journal Republika. And in that small article, he again stood for his ideas between the war, when where he wrote about the idea of autonomy of art. Art should not be party-oriented. It should be autonomous. It should not be determined by politics. And this happens already in 1945. And also that famous Congress that was held in 1948 was also contradictory. We have on one side Milovan Đilas, who holding a speech in favor of socialist realism. But Miroslav Krleža was present on that same Fifth Congress. And he was dissatisfied with Gilles's speech. And after the formal part of that Fifth Congress, he spoke again with Josip Broz. And surprisingly, what Josip Broz answered, he said, "Don't worry, this is personal Gilles attitude." Miroslav Krleža wrote and spoke about this event. So we see that even in this short period of time, between 1945 and 1950, we can see that the idea of autonomous art or modernistic art is still alive. And that socialist realism in Yugoslav context is just one episode among within the debates about the nature of art, about the relation of art and politics that were held within Yugoslav communist movement. So, what is my thesis? My thesis is that maybe we can change the view on Yugoslav socialist realism. I would not say that Yugoslav socialist realism is just an anti-modernistic, totalitarian, pro-Stalinistic model. It is that. It was maybe a dead end, but it's just one phase in the development of Yugoslav modernism. So instead of reading socialist realism as some kind of break with modernism, I would rather interpret it as within the line of continuity between Yugoslav avant-garde, where that circle of Belgrade's surrealists are very important. Surrealists left their surrealist agenda and joined the Yugoslav Communist Party. That is one element. The other element is socially engaged realistic art that was developed in the 30s. Third element is Yugoslav partisan art. After that, we have socialist realism, and after that, modernism. And I would say that all those formations are just different manifestations of one idea of Yugoslav modernity. And within that continuity, within that long tradition of Yugoslav left heritage, we have some persons, historical figures that illustrate all those contradictions within the idea of Yugoslav modernism. For example, Vojin Bakić, or even more, Otto Bihelj-Merin. Maybe you know Otto Bihelj-Merin. He wrote first book ever written about German avant-garde art after that famous exhibition Entertainte Kunst that Nazi held. Otto Bihelj-Merin wrote almost one of the first books on that subject. During the period of socialist realism, he was one of the most strong defenders of that dogma of socialist realism, and after the war, he is one of the most important theoreticians of Yugoslav neo-avant-garde. So the idea of Yugoslav modernism was some kind of experiment, big social utopian experiment that was so, diffuse that it integrated in itself the idea of avant-garde, the ideas of realism, and after that, even the ideas of neo-avant-gardes. So my thesis is that social realism is not just a break within the body of modernism. It's just one episode of that big utopian narrative about modernity and about the visions, how art can change society. That would be it. Thank you.